The harbor water was black as ink and twice as cold, a liquid grave waiting to swallow the secrets of Busan's underworld. Most people stayed far away from the docks after midnight, fearing the shadows that moved between the shipping containers, but Yerin Seo was finishing a grueling double shift. Her feet ached with a rhythmic throb from hours of serving tables, and the salt air felt like a heavy blanket against her skin. Then came the sound, a violent metallic splash that tore through the silence of the pier, followed by the frantic churning of water. She didn't call for help. In this part of the city, help rarely came for free, and there was simply no time. Yerin dived into the freezing depths, her white waitress blouse billowing like a shroud around her as she broke the surface tension. Below, the world was a murky green silence, illuminated only by the dying glow of a car's headlights. She saw him, a man in a tailored black suit sinking toward the silt. He was motionless, his eyes closed in a peaceful surrender to the deep, his last breath escaping in a trail of silver bubbles that danced past her face. As she reached for his hand, his shirt drifted open in the current, revealing a sprawling, intricate tiger tattoo that covered his chest, the unmistakable mark of the Beon-gae Syndicate. Yerin didn't know the tattoos, and she didn't know she was pulling a devil back to the shore. To the outside world, Yerin Seo was just another invisible face in the crowd of Busan's bustling, neon-lit nightlife. She was a woman defined by her uniform, the crisp white long-sleeved blouse, the dark-fitted vest, and the sensible black trousers that carried her through endless 12-hour shifts. Her life was a repetitive cycle of carrying heavy trays, dodging the unwanted advances of drunken patrons, and calculating everyone she earned to stay ahead of the predatory interest rates on her family's debt. Her soft facial features and delicate jawline often hid a core of iron, a resilience born from losing her parents early and assuming the role of provider for her younger brother and aging grandmother. She was used to being a ghost in a white blouse, moving silently between tables, unnoticed by the powerful men who frequented the restaurant. She had learned to keep her head down, to never speak out of turn, and to ignore the dangerous shadows that loomed over the city's alleys. But on that fateful Tuesday night, the quiet rhythm of her survival was shattered. The invisibility she had cultivated for years was about to become the only shield for a man who lived in the brightest, bloodiest spotlights of the criminal world. She was about to discover that sometimes the most ordinary person is the only one who can save a monster. The shock of the salt water against her skin felt like 1,000 needles, but Yerin didn't slow down. She kicked deeper into the abyss, her eyes burning as she peered through the darkness of the harbor. The man was heavy, a solid muscular build that fought against her attempt to pull him upward toward the moonlight. His black tailored suit jacket was waterlogged, acting like an anchor designed to keep him in the silt forever. Yerin's lungs began to scream for air, a hot fire spreading through her chest, but she refused to let go of his limp hand. She could see the silver glint of his necklace and the dark, swirling patterns of the tiger tattoo beneath his translucent, soaked shirt. With a final, agonizing surge of strength that felt like it would tear her muscles, she broke the surface, gasping for air that tasted of salt and oil. She dragged him toward a low-hanging service ladder, her slim arms trembling under his dead weight. Every inch was a battle against the current and the exhaustion claiming her limbs. Finally, she hauled him onto the cold concrete of the pier. He lay there motionless, his sharp masculine features pale under the flickering amber streetlights. His black hair was slicked back, plastered to his head, and his black necktie was loosened, hanging like a noose. He looked like a fallen king, discarded in the trash of the docks, yet even in his unconscious state, he radiated a terrifying, quiet power. Panic flared in her chest as she realized he wasn't breathing. Yerin knelt beside him, her soaked clothing clinging to her form as she began chest compressions with frantic energy. She pushed with all her might, her small hands looking fragile against his broad, tattooed torso. "Don't you dare die," she whispered through chattering teeth, her voice lost in the wind. Suddenly, Mutaek convulsed, coughing up a lungful of harbor water that splattered the concrete. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open to see a girl with long dark brown hair sticking to her face, staring at him with a calm but serious expression. Yerin didn't wait for him to speak or recover. She noticed a jagged gash on his temple that was bleeding profusely, the deep red staining his white dress shirt and mixing with the salt water. Without a second thought, She reached up and unbuttoned her fitted vest, pulling it off to reveal the soaked blouse beneath. She pressed the dark, heavy fabric firmly against his wound to staunch the flow. Mutaek's square jaw tightened in pain, but his gaze remained locked on hers, searching for an ulterior motive he couldn't find. He had spent his life surrounded by men who would kill for him or kill to be him, yet here was a stranger with minimal makeup and a simple bun, treating him with the gentle care usually reserved for a loved one. To her, he wasn't a legend. He was a man bleeding out in the cold. Mutaek tried to sit up, his black leather dress shoes slipping on the wet concrete as his equilibrium failed him. His head spun with a sickening vertigo, the memory of the car plunging through the guardrail flashing like a nightmare behind his eyes. He knew he couldn't stay here. The men who had forced his car off the road would surely return to ensure the job was done. He looked at the girl, this Yerin, who was still holding her own vest against his head, her hands steady despite the cold. "You need to leave," he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that felt like grinding stones. Yerin shook her head, her oval face set in a look of quiet defiance that surprised him. "You're in no condition to go anywhere. You're losing too much blood and you're going into shock." She looked toward the distant, wailing sound of sirens, but Mutaek grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak, but the intensity in his dark eyes stopped her cold. "No police, no hospitals. If they find me, they find you." Yerin understood the unspoken threat immediately. People in tailored suits with massive tattoos didn't want to answer questions from the authorities. She thought of her small apartment above the restaurant, a cramped space that smelled of laundry detergent and old wood. It was barely a home, but it was a fortress. She helped him to his feet, his arm draped over her shoulders, leading the devil into the only sanctuary left. The climb up the back stairs to her studio apartment was an exercise in pure willpower and physical agony. Mutaek was a dead weight, his muscular frame nearly crushing Yerin, and her small feet buckled with every step on the rusted metal stairs. When they finally slipped inside, she locked the 3 separate bolts on the door, a habit she'd formed to keep out the debt collectors that haunted her life. She lowered him onto her single bed, the only piece of furniture that wasn't a folding chair or a stack of plastic crates. The room was dim, lit only by the neon blue and pink glow of a nearby karaoke bar filtering through the thin, tattered curtains. As she moved to get a meager first aid kit, Mutaek's eyes scanned the room. It was a space of profound poverty but meticulous, loving order. There were no luxuries, just a few books and a framed photo of an older woman. He realized then that this girl had absolutely nothing of material value, yet she had risked her life for a stranger without a second thought. Yerin returned and began to clean the wound on his head with practiced efficiency. She didn't ask his name or how he ended up in the harbor. She simply worked, her delicate jawline tight with concentration. Mutaek watched her, his composed facial expression masking the turmoil inside. For the first time in 20 years, the man who controlled the golden dragon felt truly vulnerable. The next morning, the sunlight was a cruel intrusion that highlighted the bloodstains on the floor. Yerin sat on the floor, her back against the locked door, having stayed awake all night listening for footsteps in the hallway. She turned on the small, static-filled television, keeping the volume low so as not to alert the neighbors. The morning news was dominated by aerial shots of the harbor. A black sedan had been pulled from the water, crushed and empty. The reporter spoke of Mutaek Kang, the chairman of a major holding company, who was missing and presumed dead after an apparent tragic accident. The screen showed a professional photo of Mutaek in a tuxedo, looking cold, untouchable, and dangerous. Yerin looked from the screen to the man sleeping fitfully on her bed. His black hair was messy now, and his shirt was open, revealing the full extent of the tiger tattoo that seemed to snarl at her from his skin. She felt a cold shiver of realization. She hadn't just saved a man, she had saved a myth. The Golden Dragon was a name spoken in hushed tones at the restaurant, associated with disappearances and the dark side of Busan's economy. She looked at her own hands, still rough from dishwater and stained with his blood. She was a waitress whose biggest problem was an electricity bill, and now she was harboring a king. Mutaek woke to the sound of the news anchor's voice. He saw the flicker of genuine fear in Yerin's large dark eyes as she watched the screen. He sat up slowly, his body protesting every movement, the bruises from the crash turning a deep purple. The sharp masculine structure of his face seemed even more severe and intimidating in the daylight. "You know who I am now," he said, his voice regaining its natural command. Yerin didn't flinch or pull away. She turned off the TV and stood up, smoothing her wrinkled, salt-stained blouse. "I know who the news says you are. To me, you're just the man who coughed up half the harbor on my shoes." Mutaek stood, his solid build making the tiny apartment feel like a cage. "I need to leave. If my enemies find out I'm alive, they will burn this entire building down to get to me. You've done enough, more than anyone ever has." He reached for his jacket, but the wound on his temple began to seep fresh red. Yerin stepped forward, her hand moving to his chest to stop him. "You can't go. You'll collapse before you reach the end of the block. I have a shift at the restaurant. Stay here. Keep the curtains closed. I'll bring back food." Mutaek looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw a girl who had more courage than his entire board of directors. The days that followed were a blur of high-stakes tension and quiet, strange intimacy. While Yerin worked her double shifts at the restaurant, Mutaek remained a ghost in her apartment, a shadow among her laundry. They spoke in the quiet hours of the night, their voices low as the city slept. Yerin told him about her parents' business that failed and the mountain of debt that followed their deaths. She spoke of the collectors who came once a week, their voices loud, and their threats becoming more creative and violent. Mutaek listened, his square jaw tightening as he heard the details of her daily struggle for dignity. He realized that while he had been playing games of power with millions of dollars, this girl was fighting a war for pennies. He looked at his own scarred body, each mark a story of violence he had chosen, and then at her patched clothing and worn-out shoes. He felt a profound sense of shame he hadn't experienced since childhood. He had built an empire on the suffering of people like her, yet she had treated his wounds with the last of her clean bandages. One night, as she sat on the floor mending a tear in her trousers by candlelight, Mutaek asked why she hadn't turned him in for the reward money. Yerin looked up, her lips slightly parted in surprise. "Because you were dying. Everything else is just noise." But the shadows were closing in on their sanctuary. In the underworld, news of Mutaek's disappearance had ignited a frantic and bloody power struggle. Angelo, his ambitious nephew and the one who had orchestrated the accident, was moving to consolidate power. He began purging anyone still loyal to Mutaek, and his search expanded from the docks to the residential districts. One afternoon, while Yerin was serving a table of rowdy businessmen, a group of men in dark suits entered the restaurant. They didn't order food. They carried an aura of violence that made the air turn cold. They showed a photo of Mutaek to the manager, their eyes searching the room like predators. Yerin felt her heart hammer against her ribs, but she kept her face composed, a mask of professional boredom. She walked past them with a tray of drinks, her gaze fixed on the floor to avoid eye contact. "Have you seen this man?" one of them asked, grabbing her arm with a crushing grip. Yerin looked at the photo, then at the man. She recognized the cold, predatory look in his eyes. It was the same look Mutaek had when he first woke up. "No," she said, her voice steady and hollow. "I just work here. I don't look at the customers' faces, I just see the orders." The man sneered and shoved her away, his eyes moving to the next person. Yerin sprinted home as soon as her shift ended, her heart racing faster than her feet on the pavement. She burst into the apartment to find Mutaek standing by the door, a small kitchen knife in his hand. He had heard her frantic footsteps coming up the stairs. "They're here," she gasped, locking the 3 bolts with trembling fingers. "They were at the restaurant. They're showing your picture to everyone. They're getting closer." Mutaek's neutral expression didn't change, but his grip on the knife tightened until his knuckles were white. "Then it's over. I have to go before they trace me here." He moved toward the door, but Yerin stood in his way, her small frame blocking the exit. "If you go out there, they'll kill you. They have cars at every intersection." Just then, a heavy, rhythmic knock echoed through the door. It wasn't the police or the mob. It was a demanding thud that Yerin knew all too well. "Yerin Seo, open up." "We know you're in there. You're 3 weeks behind on the interest." It was the debt collectors, not the assassins. But in the silence of the afternoon, the noise was a beacon that would draw the wrong kind of attention. Mutaek looked at Yerin, seeing the pure terror in her eyes. He realized that if he stayed, the mob would find her. If he left, she would still be crushed. Yerin opened the door just a crack, the chain still in place. 3 large men stood in the hallway, their presence making the narrow corridor feel like a tomb. "I told you I'll have the money by Friday," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to be brave. The lead collector laughed, a harsh, grating sound that filled the small room. "We're tired of waiting, Yerin. Maybe we take that TV or the few things you have left, or maybe we find another way for you to pay." He pushed against the door, and the wood groaned under the pressure. From the bathroom, Mutaek listened to the humiliation she was enduring. He felt a rage he hadn't felt in years, not the cold, calculated rage of a boss, but the protective fury of a man who owed a life. He reached into the hidden lining of his suit jacket and pulled out a burner phone he'd kept for emergencies. He made a single call to a number that shouldn't exist. No names were spoken, only a location and a short, lethal command. 10 minutes later, as the debt collectors were getting ready to kick the door in, their phones rang simultaneously. They answered, their faces turning from arrogance to pure, ashen terror in seconds. They looked at the door, then at each other, and literally tripped over themselves running down the stairs. Yerin stood in the doorway, stunned by the sudden silence. The next morning, Yerin received a notification on her phone that made her heart stop. Her bank account, which usually held less than 20,000 won, now showed a balance that made her head swim with dizziness. Every one of her family's debt had been paid in full, with a massive surplus remaining that would take her a lifetime to earn. She stared at Mutaek, who was sitting at her small table drinking tea as if nothing had happened. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Mutaek put down the cup, his sharp features softening for a moment. "I made a few calls. Your debt was an insult to the life you saved. You shouldn't have to live in fear of small men." Yerin didn't look happy, she looked terrified. "Where did that money come from? Is it blood money?" Mutaek stood and walked to her, his tall build casting a long, protective shadow. He reached out and tucked a strand of her dark brown hair behind her ear. "It's clean, Yerin. It comes from accounts the Syndicate doesn't know about. It's the first honest thing I've done with my wealth in a long time." But the moment was shattered by the sound of tires screeching in the street below. Mutaek looked out the curtain. 3 black sedans had pulled up. Angelo had found the signal. "Go to the roof," Mutaek commanded. "Don't look back." Yerin grabbed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I'm not leaving you to die here." Mutaek looked at her oval face, seeing the same terrifying determination that had pulled him from the harbor waters. "Yerin. These men aren't debt collectors. They are monsters who enjoy the kill." He grabbed his suit jacket and checked the edge of his blade. "But I am the man who taught them how to be monsters. I am the shadow they fear. Go now." He shoved her toward the fire escape just as the front door exploded inward with a deafening crash. The sound of gunfire filled the small apartment, shattering the few dishes she owned and the framed photo of her grandmother. Mutaek moved with a lethality that Yerin had never imagined. He wasn't the wounded man from the pier. He was a force of nature. From the fire escape, Yerin watched through the window as Mutaek took down the first 3 attackers with nothing but a knife and his bare hands. His white shirt was quickly stained with new blood, but his movements were fluid and precise. He looked like the tiger on his chest come to life, protecting its territory. She realized then that Mutaek Kang hadn't been lying when he said he was dangerous. But even as she saw the violence, she didn't see a villain. She saw a man fighting to keep her world from burning to ashes. The battle moved like a storm into the hallway and down the stairs. Yerin didn't go to the roof. She followed the sound of the chaos down, her heart in her throat. She saw the carnage in the narrow corridor, men she had passed every day now lying in heaps. She reached the lobby just as Mutaek stepped out into the street. He was surrounded by a dozen gunmen. Angelo stood in the center, a smirk on his young, arrogant face. "So the legend survived," Angelo sneered, checking his watch. "And all for a little waitress who smells like cheap soup." He pointed his gun at Yerin, who was standing frozen in the doorway. Mutaek's composed expression finally broke into a mask of pure, masculine rage. "If you touch her, I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never see the sun again. I will dismantle everything you love." Angelo laughed and pulled the hammer back on his weapon, ready to end it. But before he could fire, a red laser dot appeared on his forehead. Then another on his chest. From the rooftops, snipers, Mutaek's true loyalists who had been waiting for his signal, held the entire street in a vice grip. Mutaek walked toward Angelo, the crowd of gunmen parting like the Red Sea. He took the gun from Angelo's hand and pressed it against his own forehead. "Kill me then," Mutaek challenged, "but you'll die a second later." The silence on the street was deafening, broken only by the sound of the rain starting to fall. Angelo's hand shook, the reality of Mutaek's return finally sinking in. He realized that the wolf had never been missing. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike. Mutaek leaned in close, his voice a whisper that carried across the pavement like a death sentence. "I'm giving you one chance to live because we share blood. Take your men and leave Busan. If I ever see your face again, I won't use a gun." "I'll use the harbor." Angelo backed away, his bravado crumbling into dust. He signaled to his men, and the sedan sped away into the darkness, leaving the street in a cloud of exhaust and shame. Mutaek stood alone in the center of the road, his black suit torn and bloodied. He turned to look at Yerin. She was still standing in the doorway, her white blouse soaked with sweat and rain, her long hair wild around her face. She looked at the man she had saved, the man who had just dismantled an army for her. She didn't see a mob boss. She saw the soul she had reached for in the dark water. Mutaek walked back to her, his masculine facial structure softening. He didn't say a word. He simply took her hand, his thumb stroking her palm. The fallout was swift and total. Mutaek returned to the Golden Dragon headquarters, but not to resume his reign as a criminal king. He spent the next month systematically liquidating his illegal assets and turning over evidence against his rivals to the very police inspectors he had once bribed into silence. He was burning his world down, piece by piece, to build something new. His men were confused, and his enemies were terrified of his next move, but Mutaek didn't care about their opinions. He spent every evening at the restaurant where Yerin worked, sitting at the same back table every night. He didn't order expensive wine or demand special treatment. He drank the same simple tea she served to everyone else. The underworld of Busan was changing. The dragon was becoming a myth of a different kind. Yerin watched him from across the room, seeing the way his presence made even the rowdiest customers quiet down out of respect. She realized he was using his remaining power to protect the neighborhood he had once exploited. One night, as she was closing up the shop, Mutaek stood and walked to the counter. He placed a thick manila envelope on the worn wood. "What is this?" she asked. Mutaek looked at her with a neutral but warm expression. "The deed to this building. It's yours." Yerin stared at the envelope, then at Mutaek, her mind reeling. "I can't take this. It's too much for me to handle." Mutaek shook his head, his voice firm. "It's not enough. You gave me back my life and my humanity. You reminded me that I was a man before I was a wolf. This building is clean, the taxes are paid, and the staff are all people who were loyal to me. They will protect you when I can't." Yerin looked at the deed, then reached out and took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "Are you going away?" Mutaek's eyes darkened with a mixture of profound sadness and hidden hope. "I have to finish what I started. I'm faking my death, Yerin. To the Golden Dragon and the police, Mutaek Kang needs to die tonight so that I can live a real life. It's the only way to keep you safe from the ghosts of my past." Tears welled in Yerin's eyes as she realized the sacrifice he was making. He was giving up his name, his power, and his entire history to ensure her world remained bright and peaceful. "Will I see you again?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Mutaek leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gentle, reverent touch. "The harbor gave me to you once. I think it will find a way to do it again." 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. The restaurant, now renamed the Golden Harbor, became the most successful spot in the district. Yerin Seo was no longer the invisible waitress. She was a respected businesswoman known for her kindness and her support of local families. She still wore a white blouse every day, a reminder of the night that changed her soul. She had used the surplus money Mutaek left her to start a scholarship for children of families trapped in debt, ensuring that no one else had to live in the shadow of the collectors. The city of Busan had changed too. The Golden Dragon was a ghost story, replaced by smaller, legitimate businesses and safer streets. Yerin often walked the docks at midnight, looking out at the black water and remembering the splash. She still had the blood-stained vest tucked away in a cedar chest at home, a relic of a different life. She never stopped looking for a man with a sharp masculine structure and a tiger on his chest. One evening, as the sun was setting over the pier in a blaze of orange and purple, a new customer walked into the restaurant. He wore a simple gray suit and had short black hair, neatly styled. He sat at the back table and ordered a cup of tea. She placed the tea on the table, her hands trembling slightly as a familiar feeling washed over her. The man looked up, his eyes dark and full of a familiar, quiet power. His face was different. The gash on his temple had healed into a thin, nearly invisible white line, and his square jaw seemed more relaxed, less burdened by the weight of an empire. But the way he looked at her was completely unchanged. It was the gaze of a man who had seen the bottom of the world and was saved by a girl in the light. "Is the tea good here?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a shiver down her spine. Yerin smiled, her lips slightly parted as she felt a weight lift off her soul. "It's the best in the city," she replied, her voice steady for the first time in years. She noticed the way his shirt collar was open, and for a split second she saw the edge of a tattoo, a tiger that was no longer snarling but resting in peace. Mutaek, or whatever his name was now, reached out and touched the edge of her white blouse. "You kept it clean," he whispered. Yerin nodded, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "I was waiting for the harbor to give you back to me. I never stopped waiting." They walked out onto the pier together, the salt air cool and refreshing against their skin. The city of Busan glittered around them like a sea of diamonds, but the harbor was quiet and still. Mutaek told her about his 2 years in hiding, how he had worked on cargo ships and lived in small coastal towns, slowly stripping away the remnants of his old, violent life. He had become a man of no name, a ghost who lived only for the memory of a waitress who didn't let him sink. Yerin told him about the restaurant and the family she had helped with his gift. She realized then that their bond wasn't built on the violence of his past, but on the mercy of her present. As they stood by the rusted guardrail, Mutaek pulled a small object from his pocket. It was a gold necklace with a small, intricate tiger charm. He placed it around her neck, his fingers brushing the pale, smooth skin of her throat with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "This is all that's left of the dragon," he said. "I want you to have it as a symbol of our new beginning." Yerin looked at the charm, then up at him. "The dragon is gone. There's just us now, and that's more than enough." The story of the waitress who saved the devil became a local legend, though the details were always skewed by time and gossip. Some said she was a princess in disguise. Others said he was a fallen god who chose to become mortal. But to Yerin and the man beside her, the truth was much simpler and more beautiful. It was a story about a white blouse and a tiger tattoo. It was a story about having the courage to dive into the dark and the strength to walk back into the light together. Mutaek eventually took a job as the head of security for a major shipping firm, using his skills to keep the docks safe from the very people he used to lead. Yerin continued to run the restaurant, a beacon of hope in a city that had once forgotten how to dream. They lived a quiet, ordinary life, the kind that Mutaek had never thought possible during his years as a criminal king. Every Tuesday night, they would return to the spot on the pier where she had pulled him out. They would stand there in silence, honoring the girl who didn't call the police and the man who decided to be human. They were proof that one act of kindness can change the world. In the end, the Golden Dragon wasn't defeated by a rival syndicate or a police task force. It was defeated by a single, quiet act of selfless mercy. Mutaek Kang had spent his life building walls of fear, only to have them crumbled by a girl who saw him drowning and didn't ask for a reason to help. He had learned that true loyalty can't be bought with 50 million won or enforced with a gun. It's earned in the freezing water of a harbor at midnight when no one is watching. Yerin had learned that her invisibility was actually her greatest strength, allowing her to change the world without ever needing a spotlight or a title. As she stood in the kitchen of her restaurant, watching the man she loved laugh with her staff, she realized that salvation isn't a destination you reach. It's a choice you make every single day. The tiger on his chest was a reminder of who he was, but the woman by his side was the promise of who he had become. The harbor was still black, and the water was still cold, but for the first time in his life, Mutaek Kang wasn't sinking into the darkness. He was finally, truly, breathing the air of a free man. The legacy of that night lived on in the children who received the Seo scholarship and the neighborhood that no longer lived in the shadow of fear. Yerin and Mutaek's story became a testament to the fact that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to reach for the hand that is offered in the dark. The yellow raincoat of the reference story and the white blouse of this one are both symbols of the same universal truth. That kindness is the most dangerous weapon in the world, because it's the only one that can turn an enemy into a protector. As the narrator of this video, I hope you remember Yerin's calm but serious face and Mutaek's sharp, masculine features. I hope you remember the splash in the harbor and the tiger in the alleyway. But most of all, I hope you remember that the next time you see someone drowning, whether in water or in the crushing weight of life, you don't need a badge or a cape to save them. You just need to reach out and hold on tight. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This has been the story of the waitress who saved the devil. As the credits roll on this story, let it be a reminder that your smallest actions can have the largest impacts. Yerin Seo didn't have a plan when she jumped into that water. She only had an instinct to do what was right. Mutaek Kang didn't have a plan when he woke up. He only had the choice to be moved by that grace. Together, they rewrote the history of a city and the destiny of their own lives. Whether you are in Busan or anywhere else in the world, there are dragons waiting to be saved and waitresses waiting to discover their own strength. The world is a better place when we choose to see the human beneath the tattoos and the hero beneath the uniform. May you find the courage to dive into your own storms and the wisdom to know when someone is reaching out to pull you to the shore. From all of us here, keep looking for the light in the shadows, and we will see you in the next story. Goodbye for now, and remember, hope is the one thing the water can never drown. Stay safe, stay kind, and keep reaching out to those in need.